I was hiking alone, but met a man who changed my path. Gay love story, LGBTQ. Have you ever taken a path thinking you were walking it alone, only to realize fate had placed someone in your way for a reason? Softly. This is not just a hiking story. It's a BL webtoon moment, a yaoi manhwa love story where one quiet soul met a stranger in the mountains, and what began as chance soon turned into destiny. A gay love story that reminds us sometimes the journey matters less than the person who walks it with you. The protagonist of our story was Yunseo, a 24-year-old with a quiet heart. He lived in the city, surrounded by noise, but never really part of it. Where others thrived in the neon chaos of nightlife and endless chatter, Yunseo always preferred silence. His life was orderly, almost too orderly. Books stacked neatly, schedules followed without fail, emotions tucked away where no one could reach them. In the city, Yunseo felt like a ghost moving through endless crowds. Cars rushed past, horns blaring, neon lights flickered against shop windows. People laughed too loudly in late-night cafes, but none of it ever reached him. He was there, but not really there. Every step on concrete felt borrowed, like he was walking on someone else's life. But the mountains, softly. The mountains were different. Up there, he could breathe. The air was crisp, thin, tinged with pine and earth, as though it had been untouched for centuries. When he climbed, he left behind deadlines, conversations, unanswered messages. All that remained was the steady rhythm of his feet, the sound of leaves brushing in the wind, and the silence. Beautiful, unforgiving silence. Every step into the forest felt like a step deeper into himself. Each trail opened new passages, not only into valleys and ridges, but into memories he had buried, emotions he dared not speak in crowded rooms. He often wondered if that was why he hiked so often, not just to see landscapes, but to see himself. That weekend, Yunseo packed lightly, he always did. A small backpack, nothing excessive, nothing heavy enough to slow him down. A water flask, dented from years of use, but dependable. A packet of snacks he knew he would probably forget to eat, and, tucked carefully at the bottom, a sketchbook. He carried it everywhere, though almost no one knew. To most people in his life, Yunseo was simply quiet, efficient, predictable. A man of few words. But his sketchbook held the things he couldn't say aloud. Crooked sketches of tree branches, hurried lines of city streets, half-finished portraits of strangers he had noticed on buses or trains. Still, he never showed them. Not once. It felt too raw, too exposing. The sketchbook was the one place where his walls lowered, and showing it would mean letting someone in. And Yunseo had never been good at letting people in. He expected solitude on this trip. In fact, he craved it. The week had been exhausting. Meetings that stretched longer than necessary. Friends who invited him out even when he declined. Family who called only to remind him of expectations he wasn't sure he could meet. His phone buzzed constantly, a chain tying him down. But here, in the mountains, he turned it off. No notifications, no reminders. Just him, the earth beneath his boots, and the sky that stretched endlessly above. The morning of the hike was cool, the kind of cool that brushed against his skin like a soft whisper, promising warmth later but demanding patience for now. He tightened the straps on his backpack and stepped onto the trail, gravel crunching under his shoes. The forest greeted him with a familiar embrace. Sunlight trickled through branches, scattering across moss and fallen leaves. Somewhere in the distance a bird called, answered by another. Yunseo inhaled deeply, his chest filling with air so clean it felt like his lungs were being washed. For hours, he walked alone. The trail wound upwards, weaving between rocks and roots, past streams that gurgled over stone beds. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The forest was a language he understood, quiet, rhythmic, honest. He thought of his sketchbook often during these walks. Sometimes he would stop, lean against a tree and pull it out, drawing whatever caught his attention. The twist of a branch, the curve of a stream, the way sunlight painted shadows on stone. His lines weren't perfect, but they didn't need to be. Drawing wasn't about perfection. It was about capture, about holding moments that would otherwise slip away. But today, as he stopped by a stream to refill his flask, Yunseo felt something different. The silence was heavier. The solitude, once comforting, pressed harder against him. He crouched by the water, watching it ripple, and for the first time, he wondered if maybe he wasn't looking for silence after all. Maybe hesitation. He was looking for something else, someone else. He shook the thought away quickly. It wasn't like him. He wasn't someone who looked for companionship. People complicated things, and Yunseo's life was already complicated enough. Hiking was supposed to be an escape, not a reminder of what he lacked. And yet, his reflection in the stream looked lonelier than he expected. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine stronger than before. Yunseo closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. The world was still. The mountains stretched endlessly, and he was nothing more than a single figure tracing their paths. But then, a sound. Footsteps. Careful. Deliberate. That was how the footsteps began. At first, Yunseo told himself he was imagining it. The forest had a way of playing tricks, branches groaning under their own weight, small animals darting across the undergrowth, the wind shifting through brittle leaves. He had walked these trails before, and he knew how easily silence could bend into sound. But then, clearer. A crunch. The sharp snap of twigs pressed beneath weight, not his own. The sound trailed behind him, steady, unhurried, too purposeful to be random, crunching against the earth, disturbing the carpet of dried leaves. Yunseo stiffened mid-step, his heart thudding into his throat. Few people hiked this particular trail. He had chosen it precisely for that reason. It was steep, winding, and far from the crowded tourist paths where families snapped selfies and couples carried picnic baskets. This was Solitude's trail, a hidden path carved for people like him, who sought silence, who wanted to disappear into trees and shadows without eyes following. So why now? Why today? Why here? His grip tightened around the strap of his backpack, knuckles whitening. He adjusted his pace, quickening his steps just enough to test. The sound behind him matched, echoing his rhythm. He stopped. The forest answered with silence, the kind that pressed in too tightly, every branch and leaf suddenly heavy with listening. For a long moment, Yunseo stayed frozen, his breath shallow, his body screaming at him to move, run maybe, or turn. But fear pinned him where he stood, rooted like the trees around him. Then another step, not his. He spun and saw him. A man stood a few paces back on the trail, tall, broad-shouldered, his outline cut clean against the filtered light seeping through the canopy above. Not a threat, not immediately. He wasn't rushing, wasn't looming forward with menace. He stood casually, hands at his sides, his own backpack slung across one shoulder. His breathing was calm, not ragged. He looked like another hiker. But Yunseo's heart didn't believe it. The man's gaze met his, unwavering, dark eyes steady, carrying something Yunseo couldn't quite read, not aggression, not friendliness either, just presence. Didn't mean to scare you. The man's voice was low, rough-edged, but even. Yunseo swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He nodded quickly, though words refused to form. The man shifted his pack slightly, stepping closer, his boots crunching softly against the earth. It's rare to see anyone on this trail. Yunseo exhaled sharply, the sound closer to a laugh than he intended. That's kind of the point. His voice came out softer than he wanted, betraying nerves. A flicker passed over the man's face, something like amusement, tempered but real. He stopped a careful distance away, leaving space between them, as if to say, I won't crowd you. I'm Jae-hyuk. The name landed simply, no expectations attached. Yunseo hesitated, then forced himself to answer, Yunseo. Yunseo, Jae-hyuk repeated like he was testing how it sounded in his mouth. Then with a faint tilt of his head, mind if I walk with you? The question hung heavy. Yunseo's instinct screamed no. Hiking was his sanctuary, his escape, the one place where solitude wrapped around him like armor. Company wasn't just unwanted, it was disruptive, invasive, but something in Jae-hyuk's tone, in the way he asked, not assumed, made him pause. The man wasn't forcing himself in. He was asking permission. And against his own expectations, Yunseo found himself whispering, if you want. They fell into step, the trail winding upward beneath their boots. At first, silence stretched thick between them. Yunseo felt every inch of it, hyper-aware of the man beside him. The easy way he carried himself, the steadiness in his stride. He didn't rush, didn't drag, just matched Yunseo's pace without effort. Minutes passed. The forest filled the spaces where conversation should have been. Birds calling overhead, the rustle of wind, the crunch of earth. Normally, Yunseo found comfort in those sounds, but now they only made him more aware of Jae-hyuk's quiet. Finally, Jae-hyuk broke it. You hike often? Yunseo glanced at him quickly, then away. Sometimes? Alone? Yes. The answer was sharper than intended, but Jae-hyuk didn't flinch. He only nodded, as if the response was exactly what he expected. They climbed higher, the slope narrowing, roots twisting across the path like veins. Yunseo's breath grew heavier, but Jae-hyuk's pace remained even, his expression calm. What about you? Yunseo asked finally, surprising even himself. Jae-hyuk's lips curved faintly. Sometimes. Same reason, I think. Quiet. Yunseo studied him from the corner of his eye. There was something about the man. Grounded, but carrying weight Yunseo couldn't name. He wasn't talkative, but his silence wasn't heavy either. It was steadying. And for the first time in a long while, Yunseo didn't feel like silence meant loneliness. As they walked, the trail narrowed further, forcing them closer. At one point, Yunseo stumbled on a loose rock, his body pitching forward. A hand shot out instantly, strong and sure, catching his arm before he could fall. The touch was firm, grounding. Careful, Jae-hyuk said quietly. Yunseo's breath caught. His pulse stuttered. He pulled back quickly, muttering, I'm fine. But the warmth of that grip lingered long after, burning against his skin. They continued in silence. But it wasn't the same. Every time Yunseo's shoulder brushed Jae-hyuk's, every time their steps fell into rhythm, he felt the echo of that touch. It rattled him, unsettled him. Hiking was supposed to be escape, not whatever this was. And yet, he didn't tell Jae-hyuk to leave. By the time the trail leveled, dusk was spilling across the sky, painting it with streaks of orange and violet. They stopped near a clearing, where Yunseo usually rested before heading back down. But Jae-hyuk dropped his pack, pulling out a small lighter and kindling. We've got time before dark fully settles. Fire. Yunseo hesitated, then nodded. Soon the flames crackled softly, casting shadows across their faces. Yunseo sat on one side, knees drawn up, sketchbook balanced but unopened. Jae-hyuk sat across, gaze steady on the fire. The quiet stretched again. This time, it wasn't oppressive. Finally, Jae-hyuk spoke, voice low. "You don't talk much." Yunseo's lips twitched faintly. "Most people don't notice." "I notice," Jae-hyuk said simply. Something in the way he said it, the certainty, the lack of judgment, lodged deep in Yunseo's chest. Against his own instincts, Yunseo asked, "Why keep walking with me then?" Jae-hyuk met his gaze across the fire. "Because silence doesn't bother me. And because—" He paused, as if weighing the words. "You look like you've been walking alone for a long time." The fire popped, sparks flying into the air. Yunseo's breath caught. He should have looked away, should have deflected, but he couldn't. Not when Jae-hyuk's words pressed against truths he rarely admitted, even to himself. The night deepened. Stars stretched above them. The fire dimmed to glowing embers, and then it happened. Slow, almost tentative. Jae-hyuk's hand moved across the space between them, brushing his fingers against Yunseo's. A spark. A pause. Yunseo froze, every instinct telling him to pull away. But he didn't. He couldn't. Jae-hyuk leaned closer, his voice a whisper carried by the wind. "You don't always have to walk alone." The words struck deep. For the first time in years, Yunseo wondered if maybe, just maybe, that was true. To hear someone else here was rare. He turned his head, and that was the moment everything changed. A man emerged from the shadows of the trees. He was taller than Yunseo expected, his presence filling the space without effort. His shoulders were broad, carrying a pack that looked heavier than Yunseo's entire body weight, but he moved with ease like the forest bent for him. His hair was slightly messy, windswept, and his eyes, Yunseo noticed them immediately, held a depth that didn't match the casualness of his steps. The man noticed Yunseo too. Their eyes met across the stream, and for a heartbeat, the forest grew impossibly quiet. No birds, no wind, just the pulse of something neither of them could yet name. The stranger nodded once. "You alone?" Yunseo blinked, caught off guard. His voice came out softer than intended. "Yeah." The man didn't smile, but his gaze softened, a flicker of concern passing through. "You shouldn't be." It wasn't judgmental. It wasn't dismissive. It was simply fact, as though solitude wasn't strength, but danger. Yunseo looked away quickly, dipping his flask into the stream. He hated how his chest tightened at the words, as though someone had reached inside and pressed against something fragile. "I like being alone," he muttered. "Maybe." The man's voice was steady, grounding. "Or maybe you've just gotten used to it." Yunseo froze. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the flask. He wanted to snap back, to defend himself, to push away the weight of those words. But instead he said nothing, because deep down he wasn't sure if the man was wrong. The stranger walked closer, kneeling on the other side of the stream to refill his own bottle. For a moment they worked in silence, but the silence wasn't empty this time. It was charged, different. When Yunseo finally stood, the man fell into step beside him. Not asking, not demanding, simply walking. And though Yunseo told himself he wanted solitude, he didn't tell him to leave. He wanted solitude. But love stories, especially BL romances, rarely follow the plans we set. Because in the same forest trail walked another man, Jae-hyuk, older, maybe late 20s, tall, with broad shoulders that carried gear like it weighed nothing. His presence was unmissable, like someone who belonged to the wild instead of the city. His hair was messy from the wind, his hands rough but capable, and his smile, though Yunseo didn't know it yet, was the kind that could unravel walls in an instant. On-screen text, BL webtoon love story, yaoi manhwa romance, LGBTQ gay love. Yunseo wasn't looking for company. Jae-hyuk wasn't searching either. But the mountain had plans neither could foresee. And sometimes the path you choose bends to a destiny far greater than solitude. Yunseo first noticed Jae-hyuk when he stopped by a stream to refill his water. The man appeared suddenly, crouched at the water's edge, his reflection rippling in the current. He greeted Yunseo with a nod, casual, effortless. But to Yunseo, it felt like a boulder dropped into still water. The silence stretched, broken only by the rush of the stream. Then Jae-hyuk spoke. "You alone?" Yunseo hesitated. "Yeah, you shouldn't be." Jae-hyuk's voice carried a steady calm, as if it was fact, not advice. "These trails aren't dangerous, but solitude makes them heavier." Yunseo bristled. He wasn't fragile. He didn't need protection. And yet, why did those words linger? They continued walking, sometimes side by side, sometimes with space between them. Their rhythm began to align without conscious thought. Yunseo noticed things. The way Jae-hyuk always walked slightly ahead, as if shielding him. The way his laugh echoed through the trees when Yunseo muttered something dry under his breath. "City boy," Jae-hyuk teased once. "Does it show that much?" Yunseo replied, cheeks warming. "Only in your shoes. Too clean. Mountains don't like pretty things." It was infuriating. It was magnetic. As hours passed, what began as coincidence turned into quiet companionship. Yunseo found himself listening. Jae-hyuk shared fragments. He hiked often. He'd left a corporate job that nearly broke him. He preferred the uncertainty of trails to the false security of offices. "And you?" he asked at one point, his gaze lingering. Yunseo hesitated. "I draw. Or I try." "An artist?" "Not really, just someone trying to see the world differently." The words felt like confessions, spilling easier than they should have. But with closeness came tension. Yunseo wasn't used to someone seeing him, noticing the things he kept buried. And Jae-hyuk, his eyes held a weight Yunseo couldn't decipher. It was both steady and searching, like he was trying to memorize Yunseo in the brief hours they had. That night, when the trail forced them to camp, the tension sharpened. 2 tents, 1 fire. Silence stretched heavy under the stars. "Do you always hike alone?" Jae-hyuk asked. "Yes." "Why?" "Because it's easier not to need anyone." For a long moment, Jae-hyuk didn't respond. Then softly, "Or maybe it's harder." The fire cracked between them. Yunseo's heart pounded too loudly in his chest. He wanted to argue, to retreat into silence, but Jae-hyuk's eyes held him still, the kind of slow that felt like the world was holding its breath. Jae-hyuk's hand moved across the small distance between them, the back of his fingers brushing barely against Yunseo's. It wasn't even a full touch, not at first, just a graze, a test. But the effect was immediate. Yunseo froze, every muscle locked in place, his body betraying him. His mind screamed retreat, screamed habit, screamed solitude. Pull away, you don't do this, you've never done this. And yet, he didn't. He couldn't. The contact was fleeting, fragile, but it lit something inside him. A spark, sharp and electric, running from his hand to his chest, scattering through him like wild fireflies. He had never realized how empty silence could be until that silence carried the weight of another person's nearness. Jae-hyuk didn't force it. He didn't grab or hold. He let the touch linger just long enough to be undeniable, then stayed there, suspended between reaching and waiting. His gaze searched Yunseo's profile as though asking a question he wasn't brave enough to voice. The night air pressed in. The forest around them was quiet now, too quiet. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, carrying only the faint rustle of leaves. The fire they had built earlier cracked softly, throwing pale orange light across their faces. Yunseo's lips parted, but no words came. His throat was dry. He didn't know if he was afraid or curious, or both at once. And then Jae-hyuk leaned closer. Not rushed, not demanding, just close enough that his voice was a whisper, barely carried by the wind. You don't always have to walk alone. The words settled over Yunseo like a blanket. Simple, gentle, devastating. Because he had. For so long, he had. Walking alone wasn't a choice, it was survival. No one could hurt you if you never let them close. No one could disappoint you if you expected nothing. Solitude was safe, predictable. His silence was armor, his sketchbook, the only place where he allowed himself to exist unfiltered. But now, this man, this stranger who had appeared on a trail he thought he owned, who had matched his steps, who had seen through his excuses without flinching. This man who had the audacity to tell him, without force, but with certainty, that solitude wasn't destiny. Yunseo's heart thudded against his ribs hard enough he swore Jae-hyuk could hear it. The word broke, fragile, unsteady. I don't know how else to. Jae-hyuk tilted his head slightly, the firelight catching in his eyes. Then let someone teach you. Yunseo's chest tightened. His instinct was to laugh it off, to push away, to say something sharp that would keep the walls intact. That was his pattern. Distance, distance, distance. But he couldn't. Not when Jae-hyuk's hand was still there, patient, waiting. Not when the warmth of that almost touch anchored him in a way silence never had. The world felt unbearably small, the crackling fire, the soft press of earth beneath them, the endless night sky above. And in that smallness, Yunseo realized he wasn't suffocating. He was breathing, really breathing. He turned, finally meeting Jae-hyuk's gaze. And in those eyes, he saw no judgment, no demand, no pity, just steadiness, just presence. Why me? Yunseo asked, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Why bother? Jae-hyuk's lips curved, not quite a smile, but something softer. Because I see the way you look at the world, like you're holding your breath, waiting for it to notice you, and because, he paused, voice dipping lower. I don't think anyone's ever told you that you don't have to be alone. The words cracked something open inside Yunseo, something he had boarded up years ago. Memory surged, lonely dinners, birthdays spent sketching instead of celebrating, nights in the city staring out windows at couples walking home together. He had told himself he didn't care, that he was fine, that solitude was strength. But now, sitting in the quiet glow of a fire, with a stranger's hand brushing his, he wondered if maybe he had been lying to himself all along. His breath shuddered. He almost pulled back. Almost. Instead, his fingers moved. A twitch, a shift. The smallest act of courage. He turned his hand so that Jae-hyuk's knuckles brushed his palm. The spark doubled, tripled, flooding him with warmth so sudden it stole his breath. Jae-hyuk inhaled softly, a sound Yunseo might have missed if they weren't so close. But he caught it, and something about it made his heart stumble. Neither of them spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It wasn't oppressive. It wasn't armor. It was shared. And for Yunseo, that was more terrifying and more beautiful than anything he had ever known. They sat there for what felt like hours, their hands not fully clasped but close enough that every brush of skin was a confession. The fire burned low, shadows curling and dancing across the trees. Jae-hyuk told small stories about places he had hiked, about rivers that froze over in winter, about constellations his grandfather once pointed out. His voice was steady, low, carrying through the night like a thread that held Yunseo in place. Yunseo didn't speak much. He never did. But he listened. Really listened. For once, the silence inside him wasn't heavy. It was filled with Jae-hyuk's words, his warmth, the steady rhythm of his presence. At one point, Jae-hyuk leaned back, staring up at the sky. "Do you ever think," he asked, "that maybe the path you're on isn't the one you're meant to walk forever?" Yunseo's chest tightened. He wanted to say no. He wanted to say yes. Instead, he whispered, "I don't know how to change paths." Jae-hyuk looked at him then, eyes dark and unreadable, but filled with something Yunseo couldn't name. "You don't have to change alone." The words lingered long after, sinking deep into Yunseo's chest. The night deepened, the fire dimmed. Eventually, exhaustion pulled at them. Jae-hyuk shifted closer, his shoulder brushing Yunseo's. It wasn't bold, wasn't possessive, just steady, a reminder. For the first time in years, Yunseo didn't fall asleep alone, and when he closed his eyes, the last thing he felt wasn't the weight of silence. It was warmth. It was hope. It was the quiet, terrifying, beautiful possibility of walking a path not by himself, but with someone who had chosen to step into it. And then, the kiss. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't rushed. It was cautious at first, almost reverent, like Jae-hyuk was asking permission with every movement. Yunseo's breath hitched. His hand trembled as he clutched Jae-hyuk's sleeve, grounding himself in something terrifyingly real. The world narrowed to the press of lips, the heat of shared breath, the unspoken truth unraveling in the silence between them. For Yunseo, who had built his life around walls, it felt like stepping into sunlight after years of shadow. When morning came, the path looked the same, but nothing between them was unchanged. They walked together, not as strangers bound by chance, but as something more fragile, more hopeful. Yunseo no longer sketched only landscapes. Now, his pages filled with fragments of Jae-hyuk, his smile, his profile, the quiet steadiness in his eyes, and Jae-hyuk, who had once left everything behind, found something worth staying for. Love, in BL webtoons and manhwa romances, often arrives disguised as coincidence. But this story wasn't about coincidence. It was about choice. Two men who decided, against silence, against solitude, that the path ahead was one they wanted to walk together. What would you have done if you were Yunseo? Kept walking alone, or stopped for the man who changed everything? Softly. Comment below. Heartbreaking, sweet, emotional, or cute. Don't forget to subscribe for more BL webtoon breakdowns and yaoi manhwa love stories. Check the description for full story links and more LGBTQ romance recommendations.